At the turn of the 1960s and 70s, Soviet car exports were at their peak. Lada, Moskvich, and Volga were sold not only in socialist countries, but also in the West, in a truly competitive market. With passenger cars, this story is fairly well known. But with trucks, it gets much stranger. Because exporting passenger cars is one thing, exporting heavy Soviet dump trucks like Kraz is something else entirely. These were machines of post-war design, with wood and metal cabs built for a completely different reality. And they were not sent to some socialist country, but to the United Kingdom. And importantly, they actually proved themselves there. How this was even possible and how it all ended, let's take a closer look. By the 1960s, the United Kingdom, like most of Europe, had largely recovered from the war. The economy was growing, everyday life was stabilizing, and large infrastructure projects were expanding rapidly. From the late 1960s, the country entered a period of active road construction. As a result, demand for heavy dump trucks increased significantly. There were domestic manufacturers in the UK, but it seems they were not able to fully meet demand, and the market began to look toward imports. At first, attention turned to German Majerus Deutz trucks. They were known for their durability and reliability, but they were also expensive. This opened the door to a more unexpected option: the Soviet Union. By that time, Soviet passenger cars were already known in the UK. They were not considered outstanding, but they proved to be simple, durable, and most importantly, affordable. In the end, price became the key factor, now in the segment of heavy trucks as well. The supply of Soviet equipment to the UK was handled by UMO Plant, a company specializing in heavy and construction machinery. The first machines the British imported were Belaz 540 mining dump trucks. In terms of price and capability, they had virtually no direct competitors. So much so that a journalist from Construction News, Byros Wayne, even traveled to Soviet Belarus, visited the plant, and later published a very positive article for a British audience. The exact number of Belaz trucks delivered is unknown, but it was likely around 2 dozen. Given their size and purpose, even that was a noticeable volume. However, large mining trucks alone were not enough. British construction companies also needed more versatile vehicles, still heavy, but suitable for use on public roads. And this is where Kraz comes in. For these requirements, the trucks were almost a perfect fit. By the 1970s, their cab already looked outdated, and driver comfort was clearly behind Western standards. But Kraz had other strengths: simplicity, durability, and toughness. But once again, the key factor was price. Kraz trucks were significantly cheaper than their competitors. The first batches of Kraz 256 delivered to the UK were almost identical to the Soviet versions. These were 12-ton dump trucks powered by the Yams 238 diesel, a V8 with a displacement of 14.86 liters, producing 240 horsepower. The 5-speed gearbox was paired with a splitter, giving a total of 10 gears. Later, the trucks began to receive modifications on the dealer's side. As part of pre-delivery preparation, more comfortable seats were installed. Small adjustments were made inside the cab, and buyers could choose the paint color. At the same time, key elements remained unchanged. The steering wheel and controls were not adapted for left-hand traffic. Another interesting move was the dealer's marketing strategy. The name Kraz was not promoted at all. The trucks were sold under the Belaz brand. The reasoning was simple. Belaz was already known in the British market and had built a reputation for reliability. Instead of introducing a completely new name, the dealer used an existing one that buyers already trusted. Especially since there were plans to expand the supply of Soviet construction equipment, and a single brand made that easier. In the UK, the Kraz 256, sold as the Belaz 256, was priced at around £8,250. It is difficult to find exact prices for comparable British trucks, but for context, a Lada 1200 cost about £1,000, a Volkswagen Beetle around £1,200, and a Ford Cortina Estate about £1,600. Against that background, the price of a heavy dump truck looked very competitive. Moreover, it remained almost unchanged for more than 10 years, as the Soviet side deliberately kept prices low. Even using dumping, in order to maintain foreign currency contract. The start did not go as planned. Almost immediately, it became clear that the Soviet trucks did not meet a number of British road regulations. The headlights were mounted too high, and the overall width of the Kraz did not allow it to operate on public roads at all. The British were also not satisfied with the low top speed, and most importantly, the single-circuit braking system. Even so, these issues were resolved fairly quickly. The width was reduced to 2,500 millimeters by fitting locally produced dump bodies. Two versions were offered. These British-built bodies were narrower to meet regulations, but had higher sides. At the same time, UMO claimed a payload that was 2,000 kilograms higher than the official Soviet figures. This likely relied on the truck's built-in strength, especially considering that in the USSR, these vehicles were often run overloaded. The top speed was also increased, from 65 to 77 kilometers per hour, by changing the transmission ratios. Brakes turned out to be a more serious issue. A dual circuit system had to be added separately, using imported components. The simplest modification was the lighting. The headlights were moved into the bumper, and the distinctive boxes on the fenders were later removed altogether. Additional changes included a sprung driver's seat and an optional setup with single rear wheels. The first British company to purchase Kraz dump trucks was Cromwell Limited from Newport. After just 2 years of operation, the company's director, A. Higgins, gave a very telling assessment. According to him, after a thorough inspection, none of the major components required serious repair or replacement. Speaking about how the trucks performed, Higgins noted that they proved to be reliable, durable, and at the same time, reasonably fuel efficient. Drivers, he said, adapted to them quickly and had no real difficulties operating them. He even gave a specific example. One employee with an injured arm continued working on a Kraz without any loss of efficiency. At Cromwell, these trucks were used to haul blast furnace slag. The results were clear. 4 Kraz trucks replaced 6 15-ton trucks that had been used previously. And this matters. These were not marketing claims, but direct feedback from companies that actually operated the machines. Other contractors reported similar experiences. Gary Hodges and Sons Limited, one of the leading earth-moving and blasting contractors in Yorkshire, purchased 19 Kraz 256 BE trucks. The company's managing director, Dennis Poole, reported lower fuel costs, savings of around 850 pounds per truck per year compared to other 15-ton dump trucks. He explained it simply. Out of 3 axles, only 2 were driven, and in their quarry conditions, full all-wheel drive was rarely necessary. The construction company Dowsett went even further, purchasing more than 40 Kraz trucks and becoming one of the largest operators of these machines in the UK. They considered them almost ideal for highway construction. At the same time, their use was not limited to road building. Mitchell used Kraz trucks in power plant construction, open pit coal mining, and port projects. In fact, its entire fleet, 25 vehicles, consisted exclusively of these dump trucks. And perhaps the most interesting chapter of this story could have been linked to the construction of the Channel Tunnel. Kraz trucks were indeed used in the early stages of the project, but the construction was then frozen for nearly 10 years. By the time work resumed, these trucks no longer fit the updated requirements, and their role in the project effectively came to an end without continuation. Deliveries of Kraz trucks to the United Kingdom continued until 1984. That is when new environmental regulations came into force, and the Soviet dump truck could no longer comply with them. In total, 433 vehicles were shipped to the British Isles, and notably, during all that time, the Kremenchug automobile plant did not receive a single complaint from the UK. Even though 433 units may seem insignificant compared to total Kraz production, for the factory itself, this was a meaningful achievement. Not because of any desire for recognition from the West, but because these trucks proved themselves in real competition with foreign counterparts. Beyond reputation, there were also practical results. The experience of operating Kraz trucks in the UK was carefully studied and partially applied to later updates. A dual-circuit braking system was introduced, the transmission was strengthened, and the warranty period was extended to 18 months. The original Kraz trucks remained in production until 1994. By the end, they were clearly outdated. The cab still used a wood and metal structure, but the core qualities remained unchanged: durability and reliability, which is exactly what they were valued for. After Kraz deliveries to the UK ended, UMO plant lost its main line of business. The company failed to find new partners, and by the late 1980s, it effectively disappears from the record. The story can be ended with one more unexpected episode. Some of the British Kraz trucks even ended up in a war. This refers to the Falklands conflict of 1982, an armed confrontation between Argentina and the United Kingdom over the Falkland Islands, which began on April 2nd and ended 72 days later with a British victory. In photographs from that period, you can see Kraz 256B dump trucks already in use by Argentine forces. These vehicles had originally been operated on the islands by British companies, but were captured during the conflict. There is an almost paradoxical element to this. Soviet dump trucks sold to the United Kingdom ended up being used against it, not directly, but within the same conflict. What happened to these trucks after the war, and whether they were ever returned to their owners, remains unknown. This part of the story has no clear answer.